Chapter 4. Petra woke up, eager to wash her face. During the big rain, she had collected enough water to fill 3 plastic bottles, 1.5 liters total. She kept them in the medicine cabinet, carefully labeled so no one would throw them out by accident. On her way to the bathroom, Petra glanced out the windows at their front lawn, overgrown again with black grass. In the 3 days since it appeared, they'd mown it down a bunch of times, but it always came back. People couldn't keep up with it. It killed lawnmower blades. You needed a chainsaw if it got too tall. Pretty much all anyone talked about now was the black grass, how it was crowding out the crops, how nothing killed it. You couldn't go on your phone or turn on the TV without people talking about how it was showing up everywhere. And what was this stuff, anyway? So far, lots of guesses and no answers. In the bathroom, she stood in front of the mirror. Morning and night, she'd been washing her face with the rainwater, just a little bit on a cotton ball. She didn't want to waste it. It was stupid, but every time she put some on her skin, she felt like it was cleansing her, going into her pores and changing her for the better. Sometimes she even took a little sip, just to let it sit in her mouth against her tongue, tasting it and feeling the wetness of it before swallowing, like some magical elixir that would cure her. She'd asked her father if he could get it analyzed at the hospital, and he had promised to send it to a lab in Vancouver. Petra hadn't wanted to part with even the 50 milliliters in the specimen bottle, but whatever it was in that water, she wanted more. If they could make it, maybe she could get a lifetime supply, and it would change her life, maybe even save it. She opened the medicine cabinet and reached for one of her bottles. Her hand stopped halfway. What? Squinting, she leaned closer. Hey, did you guys do something to my water? She shouted into the hallway. Mom showed up first, already in her RCMP uniform. Hey, what is it? Look! Petra pulled out one of the bottles and held it out to her. Like there's all this crud floating around in there. Suspended in the now murky water were 3 shriveled black peas, each with a tiny sprout curling out of it. Huh, Mom said. Did you put anything inside? Of course not. Like, when's the last time you saw them? Last night when I washed my face, and there was nothing in them. Look at this one. Inside the second bottle was a skinny stem with 2 black leaves that looked like bat wings. Hey, what's going on? Dad asked, appearing in the doorway in his bathrobe, half still damp from the shower. Her rainwater, Mom said, showing him the 2 bottles. Dad shrugged. Some seeds must have blown in when you were collecting it, Petra. They just germinated in the bottles. Overnight? She saw Dad blink. What? Wait, this happened in one night? Yeah, nothing normal grows that fast. Her thoughts started coming fast and blurry, like animals on a dark carousel. Her skin crawled. She had been washing her face with this stuff. She had even drunk a little of it. She grabbed the last bottle from the cabinet and looked closely. Inside bobbed 2 prickly black stalks with wispy roots. She swallowed and turned to her parents. This stuff looks exactly like the black grass. See that growing at the very top, Mr. Antos said, pointing. Seth looked up. The grass was about 11 feet high now, and from the top grew a slightly thinner stem. From its branchlets dangled small, spiky black buds. These have got to be the flowers, Mr. Antos told him. Once they open, the wind spreads the pollen everywhere. He shook his head. 1 million seeds hit the soil, and that'll finish a growing season for us. Are you going to try herbicide? Seth asked. Mr. Antos shook his head. No point. I was talking to the Drakes and Johanssons, and they said none of the herbicides are working for them. Not even heavy-duty stuff. He turned his face in all directions. Wind's nice and light today. I think I'll burn all this down. Seth blinked. Wait, what? Are you allowed to do that? Mr. Antos raised an eyebrow and in a James Bond accent said, I have a license to burn. Seth laughed. No, seriously, Mr. Antos said. I have a license for my property. After the burn, we'll overseed like crazy and see if we can crowd out the weeds that way. And then we might be able to get a late crop." He turned to Seth with a grin. "So, you want to burn this stuff down with me?" "Yeah." It was Wednesday after school, and Hit had a good day, mainly because Anaya had talked to him. He hadn't known if she would, with other people around, but she'd actually sat with him on the stairs during morning break. He still wasn't much of a talker, but she made up for it. They talked about the black grass a bit, and she told him about a book she was reading. He wondered if it made his first friend. He turned his face to the sun and closed his eyes. The day was still warm, and Seth decided to take off his hoodie. It was the first time in a long time that he had worn just a t-shirt in front of anyone. Mr. Antos's eyes flicked to small little scars lining his long, pale arms. But he didn't look at Seth questioningly, just nodded at his overgrown field and said, all right, let's get to it." The black grass was everywhere on the island now, except a few places, including the school playing field. Down by the marina, the big plot where they held the weekend market was okay as well. And the playground, too. Mr. Antos had said there were a few farms and grazing pastures that were untouched. No rhyme or reason to it. From the shed, Mr. Antos brought out 2 drip torches. They looked like small fire extinguishers, only they were filled with a mix of diesel and gasoline. He showed Seth how to hold and tilt one so fuel squirted out in a small, precise stream, and then he let Seth light the wick. Seth held the torch in his hand, nervously. "It's pretty straightforward," Mr. Antos said. "We'll start here and work in opposite directions, around the whole perimeter. We'll meet up at the far side. Just keep moving, laying down a line at the base of the grass. A nice, steady pace." Seth nodded and started walking. He wasn't sure the black grass was catching at all. When he glanced back, he only saw little licks of flame and some smoke curling from the base of the stalks. So he rounded the first corner, dripping out his line of fire, and it still didn't seem like the flames were doing much. But about halfway along, he heard a sound like a giant balloon being burst. Pop! Looking back, he saw stalks of black grass igniting, one after another, like rows of giant Roman candles. Flames shot skyward. The smoke coming out of them was black and yellow. Was that normal? With great huffs and cracks, the fire hurried toward him in a blazing wall. Whoosh! And he picked up speed, the drip torch lighting a trail after him. He thought he heard Mr. Antos shouting from across the field, but the dragon roar of flames was now too loud to make out words, and the grass was too high to see across. The sweat on his neck suddenly cooled as the wind hit it. He glanced up as the thick plume of smoke hanging over the field and saw it flatten like an anvil, then pour down away from him toward the opposite side of the field and Mr. Antos. Seth rounded the corner to the field's far side and didn't see Mr. Antos coming toward him. He should have been here by now. "Mr. Antos?" The smoke was wafting toward him now. He heard Maddox barking. Staggering around the corner came Mr. Antos, holding his slave across his face. He stumbled and fell. The smoke thickened and crashed down over him. Seth ran blindly into the smoke. He had never smelled anything like it. His eyes streamed. He squinted. He kept going. The wind shifted direction again, and the smoke cleared, for a moment. He almost tripped over Mr. Antos, sprawled on the ground and making a terrible sound. "Mr. Antos!" he shouted, kneeling. Mr. Antos's breath came in wet gasps. He tried to stand up, but teetered. Seth ducked under Mr. Antos's left arm and tried to raise him up. He felt like his spine might buckle, but his legs straightened and his back didn't snap, and he raised Mr. Santos up. Together they hobbled toward the house until Seth couldn't manage it anymore, and they both collapsed to the ground. Sorry, Mr. Antos." Mr. Antos looked confused. His eyes were unnervingly blue, and Seth realized it was because his pupils had contracted to tiny little needle points. Maddox appeared from the smoke and circled anxiously. "Ruff, ruff, ruff, ruff." Seth looked back and saw the molten stack of smoke sliding toward them again. He had to get Mr. Santos farther away. Santos. Teetering, he tried to heft him up again. Suddenly, Mrs. Antos was taking her husband's other arm. Seth felt a huge weight lifted. Mrs. Antos could lift anything, and her husband was no exception. They hurried him toward the house. Another thin wash of smoke blew over them. Mrs. Antos was coughing now, too, her eyes streaming. Seth's eyes were teary but didn't even sting. He felt okay. By the time they hauled Mr. Antos onto the porch, he heard sirens. "Woo! Woo!" "All right, Gregor," Mrs. Antos was saying to her husband, her own voice now hoarse. "You're all right. Try to stop coughing. Catch your breath." Seth turned to look back at the field, boiling with smoke and flame. He wondered if it might jump across to the nearby fields or trees or the house. A female firefighter appeared on the porch, kneeling down in front of Mr. Antos and asking questions while checking his blood pressure and pulse. Mrs. Antos had to answer the questions because Mr. Antos was still coughing so much. The firefighter put an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. "Hey, what are you burning?" the firefighter asked. "The grass," Seth said, "like the black grass out there." "That's it?" "Yes." The firefighter's face flinched at the smell of smoke. "Masks and oxygen," she shouted at the two firefighters hurrying toward the field. "Smells like an oil burn." To Seth and Mrs. Antos, she said, "The ambulance is on the way. We're going to get you inside, okay?" Seth looked down to see Mr. Antos's hand on his arm. It gave a weak squeeze before falling away. And then they were being hurried into the house as the firefighters uncoiled their hoses and the field burned and burned.